plant is hawthorn, genus Crataegus, a small thorny tree in the rose family producing white flowers in May and clusters of small red berries in autumn. It is native to temperate regions across Europe, Asia, and North America. Across the United States, multiple species grow wild. Crataegus, monogona, and C. laevigata in the east, C. douglasii in the Pacific Northwest, C. mollis across the Central Plains, and dozens of other species and hybrids distributed through nearly every state. For roughly 2,000 years, hawthorn has occupied a specific position in human medicine. Greek physicians of the classical period documented related plants for cardiovascular use. Traditional Chinese medicine has prescribed hawthorn fruit, called shanjia, for 2 millennia as a treatment for digestive complaints and circulation problems. Indigenous communities in North America used native hawthorn species for cardiovascular and gastrointestinal conditions documented through ethnobotanical research. Across rural Europe through the late 19th and early 20th centuries, hawthorn was a household medicine. Grandmothers in Germany, France, England, Ireland, and across rural Appalachia in the United States prepared hawthorn berry tea, hawthorn tincture, and hawthorn syrup as a daily heart tonic. The traditional name in English folk medicine was simply the heart herb. The Old English name for the plant, hagathorn, meaning hedge-thorn, became the modern English word hawthorn. Across rural England, Ireland, and parts of Scotland, the dense, thorny growth of hawthorn was used to mark field boundaries, which is why so much of it still grows in linear hedgerows today. A hedge that started as a property line in 1750 is often still standing, still producing hawthorn berries every autumn. The transformation of hawthorn from grandmother's daily heart. Remedy to forgotten hedge plant happened across roughly the same window of history that other medicinal plants on this channel disappeared. The rise of pharmaceutical industry standardization between roughly 1920 and 1970 displaced hundreds of household herbal traditions in favor of patentable, mass-produced compounds. What is unusual about hawthorn is that the displacement was incomplete. While the United States effectively forgot the plant, Germany did not. The German pharmaceutical regulatory system takes a fundamentally different approach to herbal medicine than the American system does. Germany's Federal Institute for Drugs and Medical Devices operates a regulatory body called Commission E. Commission E reviews herbal preparations the same way the FDA reviews pharmaceutical drugs, with formal evidence requirements, clinical trial data, and approval or rejection based on demonstrated safety and efficacy. Commission E approved hawthorn leaf and flower preparations in the 1980s for the treatment of New York Heart Association Functional Class 2 congestive heart failure, the milder forms of chronic heart failure where conventional pharmaceutical medications may or may not be appropriate. This approval was not a folk recommendation. It was based on multiple double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical trials conducted by German pharmaceutical researchers using a standardized hawthorn extract called WS-1442. WS-1442 is a specific manufactured preparation made from dried hawthorn leaves and flowers, standardized to contain a defined concentration of oligomeric procyanidins, the compounds in hawthorn most strongly associated with cardiovascular effects. By the 1990s, hawthorn extract was the most prescribed herbal cardiac medication in Germany, distributed through pharmacies under doctor supervision, the same way conventional pharmaceuticals are distributed. In 2003, researchers Pittler, Schmidt, and Ernst published a meta-analysis in the American Journal of Medicine that synthesized data from 13 randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trials of hawthorn extract for chronic heart failure. The pooled results showed measurable improvements in exercise tolerance, in shortness of breath, in fatigue scores, and in objective cardiovascular function measurements when hawthorn extract was added to standard heart failure therapy. In 2008, the Cochrane collaboration, generally regarded as the most rigorous source of evidence-based medicine reviews in the world, published a systematic review of hawthorn for chronic heart failure. The review examined 14 double-blind, placebo-controlled randomized clinical trials. The conclusion was specific. Hawthorn extract, when used as adjunctive treatment alongside conventional heart failure therapy, produced significant improvement in symptom control and in objective measurements of cardiac function. Adverse events were infrequent, mild, and transient. This is a stronger evidence base than exists for nearly any other herbal medicine in the world. For comparison, ginkgo biloba, echinacea, and St. John's wort, all of which have substantial reputations in large commercial markets in the United States, have weaker or more contradictory clinical evidence than hawthorn does for its specific cardiovascular indication. But the picture is not entirely positive, and any honest discussion has to address what came next. In 2009, a research team led by Susanna Zick at the University of Michigan published the results of the hawthorn extract randomized, blinded chronic heart failure trial, known by the acronym HERB-CHF. The HERB-CHF study was a 120-patient randomized controlled trial. testing Hawthorn extract WS 1442 at 450 milligrams twice daily versus placebo in patients with class 2 to 3, chronic heart failure already receiving standard medical therapy. The results were not positive. There were no significant differences between the Hawthorn group and the placebo group on the primary endpoint, 6-minute walk test distance, or on quality of life measurements, neurohormone levels, or oxidative stress markers. A modest improvement appeared in left ventricular ejection fraction favoring the Hawthorn group, but the overall functional benefit was absent. There were also significantly more adverse events in the Hawthorn group, 60% versus 38% in the placebo group, though most were non-cardiac. In the same general period, a much larger trial called SPICE, conducted in Europe with 2,781 patients over 24 months, also failed to meet its primary endpoint of reducing time to first cardiac event. A subgroup analysis of SPICE suggested that patients with left ventricular ejection fraction of 25% or higher experienced a reduction in sudden cardiac death. But the primary trial result was negative. This is the part of the Hawthorn story that most websites and natural medicine publications skip over. The clinical evidence is genuinely mixed. The early German trials, the 2003 meta-analysis, and the 2008 Cochrane review all support adjunctive use for chronic heart failure. The 2009 HERB CHF trial and the SPICE trial subgroups complicate that picture significantly. What this means in practical terms is the following. Hawthorn appears to have measurable cardiovascular activity. It appears to have a wide therapeutic safety margin. The evidence for its use in mild congestive heart failure as an adjunctive therapy is reasonably strong. The evidence that it provides additional benefit beyond modern multi-drug heart failure treatment is weaker than was once believed. For a person with documented heart failure, Hawthorn should never replace conventional medical therapy. For a person with mild cardiovascular concerns who is not on any heart medications, the safety profile is favorable, and the traditional use has at least some empirical support. But there is a third consideration that any honest discussion has to address: drug interactions. Hawthorn interacts with several major classes of cardiovascular medications. The mechanisms of those interactions are biologically logical. Hawthorn dilates blood vessels. Hawthorn modestly lowers blood pressure. Hawthorn has a mild positive inotropic effect on the heart muscle, similar in direction to digoxin, the classic cardiac glycoside medication. When Hawthorn is combined with medications that do similar things, the effects can stack. The clinical concerns include patients taking digoxin, patients taking ACE inhibitors, medications like lisinopril, enalapril, or ramipril, patients taking beta blockers, medications like metoprolol, atenolol, or carvedilol, patients taking calcium channel blockers, medications like amlodipine or diltiazem, patients taking nitrates, medications used for angina, patients taking anticoagulants like warfarin. In any of these situations, Hawthorn should not be self-administered. A cardiologist needs to be involved because the additive effects can produce either clinical benefits or clinical complications, depending on the specific combination, the individual patient, and the dosage. This is not a theoretical concern. It is the single most important practical caveat for anyone considering Hawthorn as a household medicine. For someone who is generally healthy, not taking cardiovascular medications, and interested in Hawthorn as part of a preventive dietary tradition, the practical applications are straightforward. The traditional preparations are tea, tincture, and syrup. For tea, use 1 to 2 teaspoons of dried hawthorn leaves and flowers, or 1 teaspoon of dried hawthorn berries crushed in a cup of just boiled water. Steep covered for 10 to 15 minutes. Drink 1 to 2 cups per day during cardiovascular tonic seasons, traditionally autumn and winter when fresh berries are harvested. For homemade tincture, fill a glass jar 2/3 full with dried berries, cover with 80 proof vodka, seal, and steep for 6 weeks, shaking weekly. Strain and store in a dark glass dropper bottle. Standard traditional dose is 20 to 30 drops 3 times daily. For practical foraging, identification is reasonably reliable. Look for a small thorny tree or large shrub, typically 5 to 15 feet tall, growing in old hedgerows, along field edges, and in disturbed open woodland. The leaves are deeply lobed and serrated, typically green on top and lighter underneath. White flowers appear in clusters in May. Red berries, called haws, appear in clusters in late summer through early autumn. The thorns are sharp and stiff, sometimes reaching 1 to 3 inches in length. Harvest the berries when fully red and slightly soft to gentle pressure, typically September through October. The berries can be dried and stored for months, processed into syrup with honey, or used immediately for tea preparations. There are no major poisonous lookalikes for hawthorn berries in most North American regions, but the seeds inside the berries should not be eaten in quantity. Like apple seeds, they contain trace amounts of cyanogenic compounds. The flesh of the berry is safe. The whole intact berry is safe in tea preparation, but ground or crushed seed in concentrated form should be avoided. What you have when you brew a cup of hawthorn berry tea from a tree growing in an old hedgerow near where you live is a beverage that European grandmothers prepared daily for at least 200 years, that German pharmacies still dispense as approved cardiac medication today, and that has more peer-reviewed cardiovascular research behind it than nearly any other plant on Earth. The evidence is mixed, but real. The safety margin is wide. The interactions are serious for cardiac patients and absent for healthy adults. The plant has been doing what it does for 2,000 years. The question is whether you incorporate it carefully or pay no attention to the tree already growing in your neighborhood. If you have access to wild hawthorn, this autumn's berry harvest will give you tea ingredients for the entire winter. Subscribe if you want more videos that distinguish what the research actually says from what the marketing says it says.